welcome to another edition of Pop and Scott Talk Baseball. This week, another week down, just another week closer. It's starting to get to me feeling like teams are just playing out the season now for the most part. Here's my question to you today, Dad. Do you see any teams that probably should have been more sellers or buyers a couple of weeks ago? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, some people have criticized the Cubs for not selling, but I looked at the schedules. The Orioles and Tampa Bay have two of the toughest schedules from here on out. The Cubs have one of the easiest. They play teams like Kansas City, Detroit, and then in their own division, of course. Now Milwaukee's starting to play really well again, and and Cincinnati's no slouch, so they still got some tough. But they play a lot of teams in the American League Central, and they're not exactly world beaters. So the Cubs have one of the easiest schedules, so they may be all right, but we'll just have to wait and see. I guess you could have said that the Angels could have sold, but they didn't have anybody to sell but Ohtani. Everybody else was hurt.
Right.
So they didn't have anybody to sell but Ohtani, and they weren't going to do that. The Yankees, same thing. Maybe they should have been more of a seller, but there again, who are they going to sell? Their position players are collecting Social Security. I mean, you got a few.
Rizzo would have been about the only one.
And Rizzo would have, and Rizzo
he's not young. Yeah.
And he's not young. And, neither is Stanton. Judge is not a rookie. I mean, he's still a great player, but and he's not the same since he came back from his toe either. So
Rizzo I would have liked to see like a team that could have used another bat. He would have been a great DH, I think, for somewhere.
Or the other team that probably should have made a move is the Dodgers. The Dodgers should have tried to pick up a starter because Goslin went down yesterday, and he's going to be out for the year. So now they've got Ryu? They got him.
Kershaw.
They got Kershaw. They got two mailboxes and a fire plug. That's their starting staff. So
yeah, but they've been pulling up guys from the minors this year, and it just seems like
and they swept the doubleheader yesterday.
Right. It just seems that I feel like, to me, the Indians might have tried to do more at the trade. Maybe I feel like we're going to look at in a minute, and I feel like if the Cubs might have been buyers instead of sellers.
See, that's the thing. They weren't sure what to do, so they kind of just stood pat.
Right. And I wish as much as my Mets got rid of a lot, I think they could have done a little bit more and got some actual MLB talent and not so much prospects. But I think I keep watching the prospect updates on one of my sheets, and they're doing pretty well in the minors. But AAA is full of 4A players.
Right. You got AAA and a half players. They're good enough. They're too good for the AAA and not good enough for the majors. We see a ton of those players.
Right.
And I'm proud of my Nationals.
Yeah.
Last night 12-3, but the night before, to watch that game, I was having a heart attack because they gave up a million runs in one inning, and then they came back and scored 6 runs. And then they wound up winning the ball game. They've won. They lost yesterday at home, so I think they're 15-19 or 15-20 at home. Their last 20 home games. They're just playing very well at home.
And what did I say before the All-Star break? The Nationals is going to be that team you don't want to play if you're playing to have anything to do in the postseason.
At the end of the year.
Those guys understand that half of them are probably not going to be there next year. And they're understanding they're playing for their next contract somewhere else. And then you got those young kids that are just playing, and they don't know any better. They know to play every day hard. Again, they're playing for their next contract as well, but probably with Washington. So we're looking here. I just pulled up wild card. Nothing really changed in the standings, other than Minnesota has pulled out even further in the Central. They decided they're playing their best ball at the best time.
Minnesota has good pitching, but they couldn't score any runs
Right
earlier in the year. Now they're starting to score runs. They're starting to hit. Some of the people who gave contracts to are starting to hit.
Right. And it's best time for them. Baltimore and Tampa, I think when I was looking at them, it's the same exact as it was last week. 3 games, I think. Tampa, wild card, they're 5.5 up. Houston, a game and a half. Seattle has moved into third spot over Toronto, which is a half game behind them. So it's going to be a good little chase here in the next few weeks. You still got Boston with 3 games back, so they're not out of it yet. But we're just counting down the days so we can say they are. In the other league, Atlanta's Atlanta, Dodgers, Milwaukee. And I can tell you that Western Conference or Western division seems to be not as strong as we once thought they were, maybe.
Well, the Dodgers, Arizona they just fell apart, and because Arizona was running away with it at the beginning. Now the Dodgers are the only viable team because San Francisco's okay, but
that's
not great.
Let's talk about that for a minute. So Milwaukee has gained a few games in their division. Philly, they're going to be solid in that first spot.
That's going to be a tough out. Philly's going to be a tough out in the playoffs.
Right. But what I've noticed is San Francisco is only a half game up on the rest of the, like Cincinnati and Chicago. Chicago's got the third spot right now with Cincinnati tied with them in percentage points, but down 1 in the loss column. So they haven't played as many games as them. But so they're virtually tied, and Arizona has pulled within a half a game of them.
Right, and they're not doing very well.
Or half a game of them, and Miami is a half a game. So the National League wild card is going to be fun. This is going to be fun.
Miami got swept yesterday by the Dodgers.
What they played? Oh, the doubleheader.
They played a doubleheader in San Diego. They played a doubleheader in LA, and they played a doubleheader with the Angels because the tropical storm is going to come in there and drop about 6 to 12 inches of rain.
They're calling it a hurricane today, Dad. It is. They're calling it.
Yeah, but it's gonna hit landfall in Mexico and then the Baja Peninsula. So by the time it gets to California, the state of California, it's going to be a tropical storm or maybe even less, but it's going to bring a ton of rain.
Right. Wow.
And
I can tell you from living out there in the lower regions on the east or the western side of if you live close to the water, they're going to have flash flooding bad because there's nowhere for water to go. It just sits there. I've been there in torrential downpours and watched streams in the streets. So
they haven't had a tropical storm since the late 1930s, and that's what
I was wondering when this is like. I don't remember one in my lifetime.
That storm was nothing like this one, and it's mainly because for tropical storms or hurricanes, you got to have warm water.
Right.
And since the oceans have, the temperature in the ocean has gone up so much the last few years, now you can have hurricanes almost everywhere.
Right. So back to baseball. San Diego is 5.5, so they're out. My Mets are 6. You did mention something before we started talking. My Mets have been winning some, but they're playing the Cardinals. So the Cardinals might be in worse shape than the Mets are. And the Mets are full of young talent. So that's another team that when you're playing young teams that are playing for nothing, they're the ones that can bite you. They're steadily just bringing up young players every day, sending them down, just rotating them, seeing what they got.
Have you seen Carlos Santana? with Milwaukee has gone crazy. He is crushing it. Carlos Santana. I mean, there's
the ageless wonder there. He's been around forever.
Yeah, he's been around forever, but I don't know what's going on in Milwaukee. But the water must be agreeing with him, or the beer, because he's really playing ball.
We've talked about it.
So Yelich.
Yelich is having one of his Yelich previous years.
Yeah, he's having a good year.
Yeah. When I was watching him earlier in the year, they were saying, when he was having the back issues or whatever a few years ago, that he messed up his swing and it was hard for him to get it back. And it seems like he's back. They're showing a side-by-side with his swing, and it looks like he's along the same point. But then again, he might have, drank the Kool-Aid and was swinging for the fences. I just remember at a young age, and you teaching us and playing ball with all of us, the first thing you got to do is you can't copy the next guy that's in the batter's box or the last guy. You got to be relaxed and find what works best for you in the box. Yes, technique and all that is going to be very similar, but you might not get the bat through the plane as the same as the next guy in the same fashion. You just got to be what's comfortable for you. And these guys are hitting by the numbers instead of being what's best.
The way I coached you kids, I always, the one thing I coached in hitting was the first thing you had to do was get your hips out. You had to get your hips out of the way so you could bring the bat through the zone. Yeah. Otherwise, you're going to swing late every time. But other than that, get comfortable. Don't sit there and go, oh, I want to hit like this guy. Because when we were kids, we used to do it as a joke playing out on the playground. We used to try to copy Stan Musial because he had that corkscrew stance. And we all wanted to copy him and see what he could do. I don't know how he hit the ball. I swear I don't. I don't know how he hit like that, but but you can't copy somebody else. You got to be comfortable in any sport.
Right. Well, back to Milwaukee, I think that's the key. Is they're young at heart. That coach, he's not a typical coach. He's a younger guy for being a coach.
Craig Counsell.
Yeah, he is still. He's a player's coach. His players come first and everything is second. Just watching, if a player and an umpire has a disagreement, he's out there in a half a second. The player's not going to get thrown out. Craig will get thrown out. Counsell will get thrown out. But also he's the same way in the media. He's kind of, I wonder if he's ever talked to Belichick, because he kind of does some of the same stuff with the media. I just think that team is well put together, and they have fun. When they're playing, they always have fun. And they've been that way for the last few years. They're dirt baggish. They're going to get dirty in a white room. That's just how they play.
They play hard.
Yeah. And with heart. Hard with heart. And that's going to – teams like that, again – they might not have the talent, but when you play them, you're going to have a tough time.
Cincinnati plays like that.
Yeah. Cincinnati's just got young dudes right now that just don't know any better. And they have a leader at first base that it might be a good coach one day, but man knows his baseball is Votto. And he's young at heart too. That guy just loves to have fun. But I bet you, there's an issue on that team. That's the guy that all of them turn to is Votto. It's not who's the leader on this team. So
he's the leader in the clubhouse.
Yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt. And I mean, there's some teams that don't have that, and you could tell. I think the Padres is one. I think everybody wants to be the leader, so you have no leader. You probably have cliques in that little group. And that's a team I think should have been more sellers. That team there. But anyway, right now it's a fun time of the season. Just looking at the wild card, American League is kind of settled out. We got a little bit going into the end there.
Oh, the other thing, Altuve last night for the Houston Cheetos, he got his 2,000th hit. And Julio Rodriguez, you know, I picked Seattle to win the American League. I picked the Cardinals in the National League. I must have been in a coma.
Julio's carrying him.
But Julio Rodriguez he's had 4 games this year with 4 hits.
Mm-hmm.
That hasn't been done since 1923.
Jeez.
The guy he's just a phenomenal talent. And,
yes.
He knocked Alonso out of the home run derby this year.
Right.
But I mean, this kid is just playing lights out, and that Seattle team is starting to make a little bit of a move.
Well, they're the 3rd team in the wild card right now, with a half a game lead.
That's going to be tough between them and Toronto because they're 2 good ball clubs.
Toronto's a half game behind them. That's going to be interesting. That's going to be all 3 of the 2. I think the Astros, they're not solidified in there. They could fall out and them 2 teams move up in there. So that's definitely stuff to watch in that, is those 3 teams coming down the stretch in the American League wild card. In the National League, and you got to keep Boston's only 3 games out of it. I don't want to not say they don't have a chance with 3 games. That's 3 weeks. And there's plenty of time still for them.
Oh, sure. We talked about that last week when the Phillies collapsed in 1964.
Yeah. Well,
and then today I'm doing the Cubs, and they had their collapse in 1969. So
right.
It happens. It happens.
Yeah.
I mean, 1951, the shot heard around the world. The Dodgers had the big lead. The Giants came from nowhere, caught them. They had a tie, and they had to play off. And Dusty Rhodes hit the home run off Ralph Branca. Or not, Thompson hit the home run off Ralph Branca to win the playoff game and go to the World Series against the Yankees.
Right.
They lost, but they went to the World Series.
Right. With Willie Mays standing on deck.
He was a rookie.
That's always been the we know who hits the shot around and who's standing on deck. So yeah, it's going to be still a lot of fun regular season baseball to be had. You still want to keep one eye on Ohtani just to see where he's going to end up at the end of the year. He hit
I made the statement last week that I was thinking there could be a couple of other guys that could challenge him for the most valuable player, but not after the week he's had. That's he's and here there are certain teams in every sport that are snake bit. And the Angels, even though they've won a World Series, they kind of snake bit. They've had problems the last few years. Some of them are their own doing, signing people to contracts they shouldn't have signed. But Ohtani hit a home run the other night, 450 feet, and they turned a triple play in the 9th inning and lost. That's not a good sign.
Well, that team they need to get some direction and stick with it. And when they did
when Ohtani signs with somebody else after this season, they're going to have to do something because I would hope that after that they would trade Trout to somebody that he could contend and get into a play. Otherwise, he'll just wither on the vine. And
right, because it just seems like his best days are behind him. But I'm wondering if he played on a contender, how many of these games would he be missing?
That's a good point.
So
and Rendon's out. He fouled a ball off his leg, and he's got a deep bruise, and he's out until at least the middle of September. So, I mean, what these guys they sign? I mean, the biggest
thing I noticed
is the availability.
Right,
that's the biggest ability. If you're not available, you're not helping anybody.
A guy we talked about before being in the MVP talk is Kyle Tucker. He is out he's on the 10-day IL right now too.
Yeah.
Remember that for the Astros. He's on my fantasy team. So when I saw that, my heart dropped a little bit. But yeah, so just key players right now missing games on key teams. You got to keep an eye on that because the guy taking their spot is probably not the same type of player. But the Angels, yeah, what I wanted to say was, when they were having good years, they had a great manager, Mike Scioscia, that could not only control their team, but he could also deal with the GM. And I think they need somebody to get that team have some direction. They have no direction. It's like Rockies. Some of these teams that just look like they're trying to swim upstream. It's just they're lost. And I'm not saying I could do it. That's why I work where I work at. But I can sit here and talk about it. But that's my 2 cents on it. But team we've been talking about today, we're kind of high on. They ended up. They weren't sellers because they ended up going on a 10-game winning streak right before that put them in the playoff hunt.
Or something like that, yeah.
Yeah, now they're in the playoffs, looking like they could be a difference maker, not only just making it, but actually making some noise. And like you said, they got a weak schedule to end the season on. Is the Cubs, and that's the team we're going to talk about today, if I remember correctly.
Right. Yes, it's the Cubs.
Right. So
first of all, I've got my River Dogs hat on. I talked about last week when my grandson was playing t-ball. That was 27 years ago. So this hat's lasted.
I was trying to see what it was, and I was going to ask you.
It's the River Dogs hat from Charleston, South Carolina. They're a Yankee farm team.
Are they still now a Yankee farm
team? I have no idea. I could look it up, but I mean, they were a Yankee farm team.
Farm teams change like every 5 years now. It's like a revolving roulette table.
All right, so want to talk about the Cubs?
We're going to talk about the Cubs, Dad. Take it away.
Okay. Well, of course, the Cubs are in the National League, the Chicago Cubs, and they're in the Central Division. They play all their home games at Wrigley Field, and that's located on the north side of Chicago. The Cubs are called the North Siders. The White Sox are called the South Siders, and it's been that way. Your grandmother was born near Chicago in 1919, and she said they were called the North Siders and the South Siders when she was a kid. So it's been that way for a long time. They began in 1876, and they became the Chicago Cubs in 1903. Throughout the club's history, the Cubs have played in a total of 11 World Series. The 1906 Cubs won 116 games, finishing a 116-36 and posting a modern era record winning percentage of .763. But they lost, this is Cubs, they lost the World Series to the team that was called the Hitless Wonders, the Chicago White Sox, 4-2. The Cubs won back-to-back World Series in 1907 and 1908. They were the first major league team to play in 3 consecutive World Series and the first to win it twice. Most recently, the Cubs won the 2016 National League Championship Series and the 2016 World Series series over the Cleveland Indians. It ended a 71-year drought of National League pennants and a 108-year World Series championship drought, both of which are record droughts in Major League Baseball. The 100-year drought was also the longest such occurrence in all major sports in the United States and Canada. Since the start of division play in 1969, the Cubs have appeared in the postseason 11 times through the 2022 season. The Cubs are known as the North Siders, as I said before. Through 2022, the franchise's all-time record is 11,161 wins, 10,609 losses. So they have a winning percentage of .513. So even though they went a long time, they won so many games at the beginning, and they've won so many lately that it made up for it. Now I'll get into a little bit of in-depth. I mean, you can't just cover a team like this in 30 seconds.
Right. Go ahead. Take your time.
1876. Ross Barnes, Deacon White, and Cap Anson were the first superstar infield. And Cap Anson was the first to get 3,000 hits in the major leagues. From 1876.
Hold on one second, Dad. Westergriff, if you watch this, my dad is just giving historical facts. He's not a fan of Cap Anson. He's just giving historical facts. Go ahead.
Okay. Well,
Cap Anson's known for other things in social.
Yeah. So is Ty Cobb.
Yeah, so that's what Westergriff, my buddy, can't stand Cap Anson since he's found out some things about him. So I just wanted to put that out there. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I don't know anything about him except that he played a long time ago. And you know, so anyway, I digress. Anyway, in that 10 years, they won 6 National League pennants. They were bought by the Spalding Sporting Goods Company. Of course, has Spalding gloves and
baseball.
They made the baseballs. Now, get this. In 1890, they changed their name to the Colts. Why? I have no idea. And I don't
Hey, here's
want to hurt you.
Here's a little fact about Spalding baseball. They're the key contributors to behind the not true story of the beginning of baseball. There's a little token for you for Spalding. They wanted to make it an American-based game, so they're the one that made up the story of how baseball was started by Doubleday.
And it wasn't. It was not. It was not.
I just want to get throw that out there too.
But anyway, they were the Chicago Colts, and they were also named. I hate to bring this man's name up again, but Cap Anson was still with the team, playing and managing, so it was known as Anson's Colts. Now, in 1902, maybe the most famous double play combination ever, the Tinkers to Evers to Chance. With the Cubs had that on their infield, and that was the most famous double play combination for a long time. They also had a pitcher named Mordecai Three Finger Brown, who was a Hall of Fame pitcher. In 1916, Bill Wrigley bought onto the team as a part owner, and in 1921, he took over as the principal owner. In 1918, in the World Series, the Boston Red Sox beat the Cubs. And Bill Veeck Sr. was the general manager. In 1929, now get this, from 29 to 38, the Cubs, oddly enough, won the pennant every 3 years. Every 3 years they won the pennant. Why? Nobody knows. They won in 29, 32, 35, and 38 every 3 years.
That's almost like the Giants every other year.
Yeah, and then they lost the World Series every time. And in 1932 is when, here's another thing that might not be true, and that's when Ruth called the shot. He did point to the outfield, but they said he called the shot, but people on the Yankees and the Yankees organization said that what he was pointing at was somebody out there where there was a glare off of somebody's glasses or something. And that's what he was pointing at. But it doesn't matter. It looked good. All right, from 1945, the post-war years, to the 1960s, they just weren't a very good team. And their biggest claim to fame during the 1950s was one of my favorite players, Ernie Banks, the shortstop. And he didn't care what the record was. He had the saying, you ready to play today, Ernie? He said, let's play 2, because he wanted to play double. He loved to play baseball. Didn't matter how good the team was. But he was that man right there is probably one of the top 2 or 3 shortstops that ever played the game. He and Cal Ripken, it's hard to beat those guys. Anyway, okay, in the 1960s, the team improved a lot. They had Ron Santo, Ferguson Jenkins, Billy Williams, and here we go. In 1969, on September 1st, they had a 9.5 game lead over the New York Mets. What was the New York Mets nickname in 1960?
Amazing Mets.
The Miracle Mets. They were called the Amazing Mets, but they were the Miracle Mets because they came from 9.5 games back to beat out the Cubs on the last day and get into the World Series. Then they got beat in the first game of the World Series by the Orioles, something like 16-0 or 10-0 or something. And then they came back and beat the Orioles, and they were known as the Miracle Mets. In 1981, now I have to jump ahead because nothing happened after that for the Cubs. Not much anyway. They did have some good years, but they didn't really do much. In 1981, Bill Wrigley died, and the family didn't want to control the team anymore, so they sold it to the Chicago Tribune, and that newspaper controls the team today. In 1989, they had Ryan Sandberg, Sutcliffe, Andre Dawson, and they had three pretty good rookies: Mark Grace, Sean Dunston, and Greg Maddux. They had a very good team that year. And in 89, they had that team. In 98, Kerry Wood set a major league record tied a major league record by striking out 20 Astros in a game. That was also the year when they had the Sosa and McGuire pseudo home run race. And that was before everybody found out they were both on steroids. But it didn't matter. It was exciting.
I think everybody knew. They just
Major League Baseball knew all about steroids.
I think everybody at home knew something was going on.
But see, baseball needed that.
They did.
Because after that strike that they had that wiped out the World Series, people dropped baseball like a hot potato.
Yep.
That's when baseball had dropped down in popularity a little bit. The National Football League had taken over as the number one sport. But once that happened, baseball dropped behind college football and some other. I mean, they needed something to bring the fans back and bring a spark to the game, and that home run race did that. Their retired numbers are Ron Santo, Ernie Banks, Ryan Sandberg, and if you ever saw that guy play, he was a heck of a ball player. Billy Williams, who had the prettiest left-handed swing, Fergie Jenkins, and of course Greg Maddux, who was a great pitcher for the Cubs, but even a better one for the Braves in the 90s. So that's my report on the Cubs. Like all the other teams, I know some of the fans, they say, well, he didn't say this and he didn't say that. I can't tell you everything.
Yeah.
Because we'd be here for 3 hours. I mean, that's why I encourage people, go back and look at these teams, get some books on them, look it up on the history of Google it, because it's fantastic and it's fascinating to read about it.
I got a great book on the Cubs and the White Sox separately that I actually picked up at the airport, in the bookstore at the airport a few years back. So I used to have to travel through that airport about 4 times a year. Great stuff on the history of those two teams. I just want to touch on, like, I was in Iowa. Okay, this is gonna sound weird. So I was in Iowa the year they won the World Series. Iowa, the AAA team is in Iowa. The Iowa Cubs is a AAA team, and Chicago's about 5 hours away from where I lived at in Iowa. So there was a lot of interest in that World Series. That was one of my funnest World Series to go out and just at the bars watching the games with everybody. It was that, it just, the history behind that World Series, breaking the streak and all of that. That was just an awesome time to be watching that series.
And that was an exciting.
I didn't have a dog in the hunt, so I just
that was an exciting World Series. The Cleveland team they were playing was no
right.
bag of rice. I mean teams. That was
runs when you thought the guy was down and out, and just great. It was just a fun series to watch. I just want to throw that in there because you got to remember the Cubs, being on WGN for so long. You want to talk about America's teams. A lot of people watch the Braves on TBS, but WGN was in a lot of houses across this country.
We watched
Cubs were on every day.
We watched the Cubs, we watched the Braves, and we got the Orioles on the Washington station. Right.
So, for a longest time, the Cubs were a big factor in this country. Now that, now they're, I think, on Marquee or some kind of sports channel. I don't even know who they're on anymore. We don't have those super channels anymore. So,
You
but
know, all the baseball has become regionalized because that's where the money went, and
right,
the national networks don't want the other one team going out all over the world because that and that interferes with their broadcast. Because like if ESPN was showing, let's just say they were showing the White Sox playing the Detroit Tigers on a Sunday night show, and the Braves were playing the Milwaukee Brewers on WTBS. Most of the people in the country are watching TBS because they're watching the Braves.
yeah,
They were in baseball. They were America's team.
yeah.
That's what they were called because.
And I mean, also the other thing I wanted to mention with the Cubs and Wrigley is Wrigley now is part of that neighborhood, right? I mean, that area is called Wrigleyville. They have built that, the restaurants, the bars, rooftops, all of that is built around that stadium. And maybe other cities should take a look at that. I mean, this is a city that is old. I mean, the parts were already there, but they made it fit that little part of the town. You have places like Washington where the Nationals are getting a little pushback from the city now because they said they were going to do certain things that probably haven't been done. So, area when they build a ballpark, you go, oh, we're going to build the area up around it. Because a lot of times they build them in a cheap area part of town because the land is cheap. That I really, you got to admire what the Cubs.
I mean, if you build a new ballpark and you say you're going to improve the area and you just build a new 7-Eleven, that ain't cutting it.
Right. And I mean, that's.
I mean, even if you're Slurpee, I mean,
we saw some things with Washington when it first started, and that area has gotten better, but there still probably needs to be a lot more done. But anyway, back to the Cubs. This is another team that's been around since beginnings with rich history. Like my dad said, please, if you want to learn more about the Cubs, there's plenty out there. I mean, videos, books, there's Cubs, just rich. I'm looking, I have a hand-drawn picture of Billy Williams on my wall right here, Hall of Fame autographed picture. And I'm not even a Cubs fan, but I have that because of the rich history of the team. So I just bleacher bumps. This place is the W flag. They might have been the first team to start waving the victory flag after games. I don't really.
It's possible. It's possible.
I mean, it's just. I do have a Tinker card, by the way, T206. But anyway, I do have a Tinker.
Oh, Tinker, every chance, yeah.
Yeah, I have one. I have one of those cards. He's the one I could afford. So
there's a card with all three of them on there, and that thing is worth a gazillion dollars.
But that's about it for that. I mean, just awesome history. Again, I'm not a Cubs fan, but I love the history of the sport. I just want to go down. I'm sitting here looking. Retired numbers. I always like to look at Hall of Famers.
And I looked at the Hall of Fame, and here again, you had Hall of Famers who played on other teams,
right?
That came over for a cup of coffee. And
Gene Kelly, Ralph Kiner, Chuck Klein.
See, Ralph Kiner played with the Pittsburgh Pirates the majority of his career.
Lee Smith started with them, so
yeah, he is in the Hall of Fame as a Pittsburgh Pirate.
Yeah. So Billy Williams, like Hack Wilson.
Yeah, Hack Wilson.
Ryan Sandberg. I mean, you got Fred McGriff, who played for a handful of teams. I don't know who he went in under. Who would you think? I haven't seen his bus. I don't know what they put him in under. Which team?
I
would have to say the Braves, but
I would think
Toronto would be strong too. But
I would think it's either the Braves or the Toronto Blue Jays.
Yeah.
I'll have to look that up now that you mentioned it. I hadn't even thought about it.
Right. Well, I mean, I just was curious. I
mean,
see
the
it.
important
I
thing
love
is,
looking at seeing these players who played on their team. You kind of forget time. You know, Lou Brock played for the Cubs. Didn't realize that. It's just, you know, I
Lou
just like to
Brock,
see it.
Lou Brock was the guy that got traded to the Cardinals, and the Cubs took a long time to recover from that. The Cardinals went on to win a World Series with Lou Brock.
Right. All right. Well, thanks for that, Dad. A lot of good with the Cubs now. Like we were saying before, man, it's going to be fun watching them. That's a fun crowd.
Yep, that's
Even
another
though
one of those teams. That's another one of those teams where the fan base is rabid. I mean, they don't sell out every game, but they've had high attendance through all the years of losing, and now they've turned it around and they're doing so much better, and it's nice to see. I mean, the Bartman. I didn't even mention the thing about the goat. You know,
right, the goat. I was waiting for you to bring up the goat because that's actually
that was in 45, and then
that's supposed to be a true story. So.
Yeah, it is. And then Steve Bartman, that kind of soured me on the Cubs for a while.
Right.
They blamed that guy for losing the playoffs, which was pretty. I'll be blunt. It's asinine.
Right. That was ridiculous. Yeah.
28 people reached for that foul ball. And
I tell you what, the guy on that team Cody Bellinger, did he turn his career around this year or what?
Oh my goodness!
I mean, he went from rookie, MVP, whatever contender to being terrible, and now he's. I mean, people thought he was going to get traded for sure, and they won those games.
Well, see, the other thing about this is about Cody Bellinger too. I saw this on MLB the other morning. He had an injury with the Dodgers.
Yep.
And a lot like Yelich, he altered his swing so he could keep playing or come back sooner. And then he was all messed up. And they tried to work with him, and they looked at the tapes and all that. When he gets traded to a new team, and they showed the difference between his stance last year and how his swing and this year with the Cubs, and it was not entirely different, but there were a couple of little things in there. One thing, it shortened his swing, so it didn't take so long to get to the ball, because if the guy's throwing 95, 98, and the longer your swing, the harder it is to hit.
Right.
So, I mean, they shortened his swing, and that's helping him. That's helped him a lot.
I tell you what, too, they got David Ross as a manager.
He's a good guy.
The guy's been through the Cubs winning and losing as a player. And, you know, they all called him Grandpa on that World Series team or whatever.
And he's an outstanding individual, too.
Right. Another players coach, guy that's played all the way through. And so just like Cancel, he's got some highlights in World Series as well. So Cancel has him with the Marlins, and David Ross with the Cubs. So thanks again for that, Dad. Any closing statements on the on Major League Baseball or anything?
Well, there's one thing that's going to keep. You know, I'm a little bit interested in this. The New York Yankees right now, I don't know what they're doing today, but they've got a losing record. They haven't had a losing record since 1993. So,
wow.
I'm just wondering if this might be the year. They wind up losing. That's have a losing record because they're not going to make the playoffs. They're just
right.
Not.
So on one of my group chats, I do have a Yankees. Sounds like the manager is going to be gone at the end of the year if he makes it to the end of the year, and this might be Cashman's last year as the general manager. So
they're a lot like the Mets. They've got to do some work to change things around, and somehow you got to get a little younger. I mean,
you have to get younger.
Garrett Cole yesterday pitching against the Red Sox. They had a grand slam off him. I think in the first inning.
Well, you know, baseball's 162 games in the summertime. it's not for the older guys.
So that's what I'm going to be looking for.
Especially now where they're testing them for everything under the sun. The greenies are gone, the beanies are gone, all that stuff is gone. Only thing you can drink is a Red Bull, and it's a 24/7 sport now. It's not like it used to be. I was watching a thing on John Kruk walking through the Phillies clubhouse and talking about like what they did after a game compared to what they do now, where they work out and everything. Because we sat here and drank beer and smoked cigarettes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, so, one more thing, and then I'm done. And that is anybody watching us, just keep your thoughts and prayers for the people in Southern California and maybe Arizona and Nevada, where they're supposed to get a ton of rain that they're not used to. And the other thing is the people in Hawaii. That's the worst. That is the worst wildfire in the history of the United States as far as loss of life. So
since the Chicago fire of 1903 or whatever.
What they're talking about is a wildfire that started in the woods.
Right.
The Chicago fire started inside the city. I mean, it was
right.
But I mean, this was horrible. I mean, I have friends that live near Honolulu, so it doesn't affect them. But it's a shame, and we got to just keep thinking about those people. Can't forget them.
Yeah, and what's worrying me with California is the after effects is with that much rain, mudslides and everything like
that.
Flash
floods, mudslides.
Flash floods. I mean, that's and the homeless situation out there is pretty bad. So I agree with you, Dad. Our thoughts should and prayers should be going out to them and Hawaii. And can't forget Hawaii. Those people, when you got to jump in the ocean to get out of the way,
that's bad.
That's scary, very scary. And you wouldn't think of that because their forest is almost jungle. It's wetland.
But they've had one of the worst droughts they've ever had.
Exactly. I was going to say the same thing. So I second that. And just remember, when it comes to baseball, # watch the games. Till next time, like, share, tell a friend, and we'll see ya.